Hey guys, Todd Peak from Peak Performance Parts, and today we've got the rear suspension from UMI Performance for 6872 GMA body that will be going on our 1968 Chevelle SS. We got a lot of stuff going on here, a lot of components. In my opinion, every bit of it is necessary for one of these cars. There's a lot of bracing, a lot of bolt-on parts that there's no fabrication required. So we're going to start with these control arms, most notably probably the most popular upgrade, not even from UMI Performance, just in general. You know, you're going to see these cars stock had a control arm that was not boxed. It was, I think, a stamped steel piece, so they were notoriously flimsy. So the upgrade is a completely boxed control arm. This thing is super heavy duty. Every bit of it is just so well thought out. These lower control arms that we've got, they have poly bushings. They are serviceable and greasable. It's got through holes here that will match up with our rear sway bar, rear anti-sway bar, which brings me to the rear anti-sway bar. The bar that we opted for is UMI Performance's, it's their drag specific anti-sway bar. So with this car being primarily used on the street and in drag and drives, and also being stick shift, we want this thing to launch straight and true every single time. Upper control arms. They offer these upper control arms in a bunch of different ways. These are rotor joint ends. They are double adjustable and more or less bolt in. That gives us a ton of adjustability for pinion angle on the car. The lowers are not adjustable. These cars just don't generally have that much to gain from geometry changes of the lower control arm, but with changing ride height, you want to change pinion angle, pinion snap and stuff like that. Those joints make it super easy to do. They're easy to get to underneath the car. You run it up on a couple boards or put on some jack stands, and that stuff's really easy to adjust. So they also sent us our upper bushings for the rear end housing. So when the rear end housing comes out, we will change out these bushings. Also, all the hardware, we opted to get every bit of hardware that they offer for anything that didn't originally come with hardware. So all of the control arms, all of that, we purchased all of their hardware kits. Now, as far as frame and chassis bracing, we've got these here chassis braces. You know, it's kind of hard to explain without looking at it, but these actually go between kind of a cross member and the frame itself, the side frame rail. As you see it laid out here is kind of the orientation in which everything actually gets installed in the car. It is triangulated 4-link, so your uppers come in at an angle just like that. Lowers are more or less straight. They have a slight bit of inward turn to them. And then this is our shock tower brace. From the factory, the shock towers aren't really connected by anything at all. They're more or less a cup that comes off of the side of the frame rail. And our rear sway bar, there's a lot of rear sway bars on the market that are either bolt-on or weld-on. And they can either be rear end mounted or chassis mounted. Now, I did a lot of research and a lot of thinking on this. There are other options that may do a better job, but at the sake of drivability. So this car is primarily a street car, and we want this thing to be as quiet and enjoyable as possible. So going with the chassis mounted, hard mounted, welded in anti-roll bar is really, really noisy for these cars. So having something that saddles on the rear end and then just connects to our control arms, very similar to the way the factory does it. This is just an upgraded version. So moving on to the coilovers themselves, very similar to the front end, we've got the Viking Crusader double adjustables. So they're matching front to rear. We have compression and rebound adjustments, spanner wrenches. We also purchased those. The spring rates that we're using are 550 in the front and 225 in the rear. So the Viking Crusader coilovers are really the move here, I think. So these are the rear lower coilover conversion brackets. And then To complement the other end of our coilover, we've got these coilover brackets here as well. These go on the top. So we're going to start getting this stuff pulled off of the car and start installing our new stuff, so you'll be able to see exactly how this stuff goes on. Try to document that very, very well for you, and hopefully be done very soon. Okay, so we're under the passenger side of the car here, and this is normally where your factory shocks would mount. So I've got the bracket for this side, just to show you how it goes on here. So you're essentially just lining up the two factory holes there, and this third hole right there is one we're going to drill. We're going to snake in the brace up on the top and then figure out what we got to do for hardware here. All right, so we had to drop the side of this exhaust over here to get that up in there. With the exhaust system we're running, it was a little difficult. Okay, so that was kind of a pain in the ass, but we've got our brace in and everything. We drilled our third hole here using a 3/8 bolt. So 3/8 bit there. So once we tighten these two down, and as you can see, I've got them. I tried to put the nut on the bottom side anywhere I could. Back there, you can't get the bolt. Couldn't get it fed through the top. So that way, in the case that, you know, if somehow these nuts were to fall off, it'd be very difficult for the bolt to pop upward and out, so it would still kind of be there. But there should always be force pushing up on this anyways. So I don't know, something I like to do. You can do it, you cannot, I don't care. So yeah, that's done. The other side's done. Yeah, now we're moving on to some of the rear end, what we need to do. So we gotta take off our original shock mount. Our new coilover brackets fit right in here. You want to pop that dude out of there? There we go. Alright, so as you go to assemble the rear coilover setup, they specifically tell you that this kit and bracket is designed specifically for factory rear ends, 10 or 12 bolt. So if you have a Quick Performance or a Mosier or a Strange or whatever aftermarket rear end, this stuff may not work for you. You may need to call whatever manufacturer, you know, built your rear end, whatever company did it, to see if they have a bracket solution for you, because this may not work. So now the coilover bracket itself, this is your driver's side bracket in this orientation. And coming from the rear, just slide it up in here like this. It saddles over the old mount, and you line up that hole about like that. Should stay. And then you slide this in, locate it. Now there is a locating tab or a hole that they want you to drill out. Backing plate is in the way, and I don't have a 90-degree drill to do that. The two bolts on the back that go right here, our hole's a little offset, so we're gonna drill this one first, bolt it down, and then run the drill through this one. And that's where these two bolts go. It's right there. Relatively self-explanatory, but we're gonna set up the camera just so you can Alright, so before we roll the rear end in here, we're going to go ahead and basically just reverse the method of which we took it out. So I'm going to put the control arm in the frame up here, but at the same time, since I've got frame braces, I'm going to run the brace from here and just lay it down here. We'll connect the lower control arms to the rear end. That way when we roll the rear end in here, we'll raise it up a little bit, attach to our upper control arms, and then swing our lowers in place and bolt everything in. So we're going to try to see if I can get this on video. Come up here. Okay, so we've got the rear coilovers laid out on the bench, and you can tell These are just a little bit different from the fronts. Now their primary difference is the upper mount. You can see it's got an eyelet very similar to the bottom. And the reason that is because mounts for the rear are eyelets on both top and bottom, whereas the front uses like a stock GM, just a stud, to mount the upper portion of the shock itself. And on the lower part, it has a T-bar, which is simply just another piece that goes into this here spherical bearing. Now you're going to install it with the shoulder up, because that's where your spring sits. About like that. We're not going to run these all the way down because there's really no need, because as you can see, we're not even all the way down yet, and I'm well above where my upper spring cup is going to be. So a little something like that is what it should look like all the way installed. So we got the rear end slid under the car. We've got our coilover brackets assembled on the rear end. That was easy to do out on the floor outside of the car. Upper control arms are in place. Nothing is tight. So I think we got it lined up. We're just going to go ahead and raise it up. Got one end in. There's that. Both sides on the other one. Yeah, mine's got both sides. Okay. All right. So it may be necessary. We had this all the way cinched down. We could not get the lower control arm to start in here. So loosen this bolt up a little bit, and that gives you just the clearance you need to put your lower control arm in. Now you'll notice there are two holes in your lower control arm bracket. Top hole is for autocross and or street use. Lower hole is intended for drag racing use. So that's the one we're going to install in. You can see we've got the bolt just slipped through the front of the lower control arm mount there just to hold our frame brace. So we'll get the lower started with the bolt in it and then slide that up in there and put the bolt in. Not before we put a little bit of lube on the edge of our poly bushings here. Should be able just to slide that up in there like butter. So we got lower control arms in, the uppers are on, rear end is basically in there. I'm not sure, on this side it doesn't look terrible, but hopefully I got clearance to my exhaust with my coilovers. I think worst case scenario I might have to have this section here remade, kind of tuck it in with this. I got a notched tank, so could really just run it up against that thing, but whatever. We'll see. We'll find out. And that coilover should only be, it's gonna be tight. Shit.